Hey guys, welcome back to Checkerboard Chat, the official sports podcast of the Daily Beacon. This episode of Checkerboard Chat is sponsored by Grand Forest Apartments. As always, I'm Blake Von Hagen, the sports editor. He's Will Backus, the assistant sports editor. And we're here with Corey Sanning and Noah Taylor. And we're going to talk about Tennessee men's and women's basketball. All right, guys, well, we'll start off with the Lady Vols. They had that loss to Vanderbilt. It kind of looked like things might keep spiraling downhill for them. They might miss the NCAA tournament. They come back with a blowout win against Ole Miss, and now I checked bracketology today. It looks like they're the very last team in the tournament currently. So, SEC tournament coming up this week. What do they need to do in the SEC tournament?
I think they at least need to win their first round game, which is Thursday at noon against LSU. It's a team they beat in the regular season, so it looks like a winnable game for them. But LSU is a team that kind of got hot late. So we'll see what happens, but they definitely need to win that first game against LSU. If they beat LSU, then they get Mississippi State on Friday, and that's a really hard ask for them to win that game. So definitely get past LSU. I think if they can do that, if they pick up that win and then they lose to Mississippi State, which is something they're expected to do, that might be enough to get them into the tournament. Again, we talked about name recognition last week, so just getting that one win should maybe propel them into the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I think the Ole Miss win helps a little bit just because of the way they did it. Ole Miss isn't a very good team, but they beat Kentucky. We were talking about that the other day. They beat Kentucky earlier in the year. So that was a game I kind of thought that Tennessee might be going into coming off the Vanderbilt loss. Maybe they'd given up, but they get the blowout win there. They draw LSU, like you said, a tough first-round game or second-round game to get. I don't see them beating Mississippi State, but they hung with Mississippi State for about 3.5 quarters in Starkville. So maybe they can do it and kind of – they're not going to win, but maybe they can boost their resume a little bit by playing it tough there.
Could have a freezing cold takes here on Noah Taylor.
Yeah, I'm not going to do that again.
Yeah. If you had to put your finger on it, I mean, we haven't been here since last week, so there's that Vanderbilt game and the Ole Miss game. If you combine those two games, take the results from both games, is that an overall negative, an overall positive, or just they cancel each other out?
I don't know if they cancel each other out because I think the loss to Vanderbilt is a very bad loss. Vanderbilt was a team that prior to that game was 1-13 or 1-14 in the conference, and the only team they beat in the SEC was Ole Miss. And then they get their second conference win against Tennessee, and then they turn around and lose by 12 to Florida, who's another not great team in the SEC. So looking at that loss is a really bad loss on Tennessee's resume. It was the first time they lost at home to Vanderbilt in the history of the series. And it was their first loss to Vanderbilt since, I believe, 2014. So it was a big, big loss. It just wasn't – it doesn't look good. And I don't think winning against Ole Miss, who was 9-20, makes up for it, especially since Ole Miss only had 3 wins in the conference, and they're one of the worst teams in the SEC. It was an impressive win, and I was impressed with the energy that they came out with. Normally teams in that position come out with low energy. You just lost to a team like Vanderbilt. You're on the road against Ole Miss. You've got the SEC tournament coming up. There's a whole lot of factors that would give them good reason to come out with low energy, but they didn't. They came out and had, their second best game in conference this year. But just that Vanderbilt loss seems almost inexcusable.
Yeah, they really needed to close the season out on a high note, I think, and they did that by blowing Ole Miss out. But I agree that Vanderbilt loss, with the historical significance of it and just how bad Vanderbilt was and the way they lost, it's just I don't think they can cancel each other out. I think that was just one that's kind of unforgivable for them. So, good for them, I guess, to go into the tournament on a high note, which they really needed to do. But, that one's kind of hard to forget.
On the men's side, 2 wins for Tennessee last week, Ole Miss and Kentucky, both massive wins. Ole Miss, you just got to find a way to win that game. They probably didn't deserve to win that game, but they found a way to get it done at the end. On the road in the SEC, a tough place to play against a quality team. That was a big win, and then, following that up with the biggest win of the season so far against Kentucky, probably the biggest win of the season, a blowout win at home. Mm-hmm. Really needed that win. So how big was this week for the men's team?
Massive, because if you look at it, they go into Oxford and they drop that game, which it looked like they were going to there for a minute at the end. Then you're looking at, 2 consecutive losses. They lose, that would have been their 3rd loss in the past 5 games at that point. And it really would have taken a hurting on their chances to get a 1 seed, which we still don't know yet if they're going to be able to pull that off. But no, given the circumstances, they found a way to win in Oxford. Sometimes that's just what you have to do as a great team. We've seen it in college basketball and professional basketball. Great teams find ways to win even when they, the circumstances look dire. And then the Kentucky game, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that that's necessarily what I expected, but once I learned that Reed Travis wasn't going to play, given that they're playing that game with a chip on their shoulder, having gotten beat so badly on national TV against Kentucky weeks ago, it's not that I want to sit here and say Kentucky's a rollover because, they're a tough team to beat, but, they needed this week and they got it done, and they showed still why they're one of probably the 4 or 5 best teams in the country.
Yeah, there are a couple of factors for me that go into that blowout win against Kentucky. And there's the Reed Travis factor. He's out for Kentucky. He's a huge piece for them down low.
Mm-hmm.
So that really hurt them, I think, inside. Kyle Alexander didn't really do anything for Tennessee, though, so maybe it wasn't as big a factor as people are making out to be. But for me, it starts with the mental edge. And before the game, one thing I just noticed, this you could call it hindsight, but I did tweet this out when I saw it happening before the game. Right before tip-off, Kentucky's guys were kind of bouncing up and down, running around the court.
Yeah.
Tennessee's guys were just huddled together, and it was very workmanlike look for Tennessee compared to Kentucky. And it almost looked to me like artificial energy for Kentucky. They were trying to create their own energy. They're on the road, and they didn't have it. They didn't have it in that game, and Tennessee needed that one, and they got it done. And like I said, there were a bunch of reasons why Tennessee got the blowout, but at the end of the day, they needed that to stay alive for the number 1 seed. Right now, they're number 5 in the AP poll, so they're right on the outside looking in on a number 1 seed. I still think they need to run the table and win the SEC tournament to get a 1 seed. I think if they do that, they definitely will. However, if they lose in the championship of the SEC tournament, I could see them still getting a 1 seed, but that's the only way is if they win their 2 games this week. It's Mississippi State and Auburn, and then lose in the championship to either LSU or Kentucky. We'll see if LSU can hang on to the number 1 spot. They play this week against Florida on the road, so that's their big game left. What do you think Tennessee's chances are at a number 1 seed, and what do you think they need to do to get that?
Well, I'm with you. I think they need to run the table. I mean, you could always make an argument if they lose in the SEC title game that, yeah, maybe they could get a number 1 seed. But no, I think they have to run the table. They have Mississippi State tomorrow night for senior night. They have Auburn on Saturday, and it's going to be, those are 2 big games if they want to try to reclaim a share of the SEC regular season title for the second year in a row. But yeah, they have to run the table. The SEC tournament's going to be a lot tougher, I think, this year than it was on them last year. We saw them last year. They coasted to the championship game, and aside from falling behind by 17 to Kentucky early, it looked like they could take that one home. So yeah, they're going to have to run the table to get this done this year, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. But at the end of the day, I think if they do fall in the SEC tournament, I think we'll see them with the number 2 seed.
All right, we're going to talk more about what's coming up this week for both the men and the women, but first we'll take a break and get a word from our sponsor.
Welcome to Grand Forest Apartments. We have over 30 years of experience in building and managing student apartments on college campuses. We offer you, the students at the University of Tennessee, affordable luxury housing within walking distance of UT. Our professional on-site management and maintenance staff will make every effort to make your home away from home a great experience. Things that are included with living at Grand Forest are spiral staircase design. We also have free water and laundry facilities. We have walk-in closets and full-size beds. There is a dishwasher and microwave included. Free Comcast internet and cable TV. Our space also features a swimming pool. We also have 24-hour on-call maintenance. We hope you will choose to make yourselves at home with us.
All right, so the Lady Vols this week, you guys are both going to be there at the SEC tournament. What do the Lady Vols need to do? They start off with LSU on Thursday at noon. Obviously, they need to win that game, right?
Well, yeah. It would be a huge win for them. Big resume booster to at least pick up 1 win in the SEC tournament, especially the way the season's gone. I think the biggest difference for Tennessee is going to be the play from their guards. Their front court has been pretty consistent this year. They've got players like Sheridan Green and Renaya Davis who have had really nice games. Amira Collins, the true freshman, she just got named SEC Freshman of the Week for her past 2 performances. She set a career high against Vanderbilt, and she actually got a starting nod against Ole Miss, and she finished with 9 points and I think 3 rebounds. So she's really starting to pick up her play. They've got really good play in the paint. They just need to get better from distance, outside the perimeter and a little bit inside the arc, from elbow jumper range. Their guards really need to get better. Avina Westbrook was a leading scorer for a while. She's failed to score in double-digit points for the past few games. Didn't against Vanderbilt, didn't against Ole Miss. Mimi Jackson had 20 against Ole Miss, which was a pretty big factor in their win. It was the first time she'd reached 20 points since the Auburn game. So we see the difference that their guards make when they're playing at a high level. And I think if they can get their guards to play at a high level with the front court staying as consistent as it has been, then they'll beat LSU. But that's the biggest factor for me.
Yeah, I'd say it's about, for them to be successful, it's going to be about all that meshing at once. Like you said, I mean, it's the paint. In the paint, they've been very consistent. You've had Sheridan Green who's been posting double-doubles or near, I think she almost had one yesterday too. So, yeah, it's going to be about being able to have Renai Davis, Vina Westbrook, and Mimi Jackson all meshing well at the same time the post is playing well. So, yeah, Mimi Jackson's 20 points yesterday were a promising sign because, there's been games where she hasn't been a factor at all. So, for her to have a game like that, if that can carry over against LSU, Renai Davis get Vina Westbrook back to form when she was scoring 17, 18, 20 points a game. If they can do that, I think that they'll be successful against LSU, and if they can carry it over into Mississippi State, they can play well in that game.
For the men coming out this week, like I said, Mississippi State on Tuesday night, and then at Auburn on Saturday to finish out the regular season. Right now, just trying to keep pace with LSU. Got the winner of Kentucky, so that takes care of that. But right now, Tennessee and LSU are tied. There's no tiebreaker in the SEC like we saw last year, the regular season. So if Tennessee can win out and LSU takes care of business, that's going to be co-champions again like last season, which I think is ridiculous. I think there should be a tiebreaker.
Yeah.
If you play head-to-head, I don't see why there shouldn't be a tiebreaker there. You could even make it, I mean, if it was Tennessee and Kentucky, they both split, then you don't want to go to like a third tiebreaker, then I can get that. But if it's one head-to-head matchup, I mean, I think
Where did the
it should be a
NCAA?
tiebreaker. You guys think that too? Or?
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, if you play in the regular season, especially once, it's not like they've played twice. Like you said about Kentucky, that's somebody they draw twice. But yeah, I mean, that game should count for something. So yeah, I totally agree.
Ties are for soccer, and that's why I don't like soccer.
Yeah.
But so Mississippi State and Auburn games, Tennessee needs to win. What's the key to Tennessee to carry over the momentum from this last week into this last week of the regular season?
Well, I think the key for tomorrow night is going to be given, not to let the emotions of senior night overwhelm them. Because, it's not like they're getting rid of, some spring chickens here. Admiral Schofield is going to be honored. Kyle Alexander's going to be honored. They've both been, staples in the lineup. And not just that, you have, Lucas Campbell and Brad Woodson, who have both been on the team for 4 or 5 years now. And, granted, they're just walk-ons, but you ask Rick Barnes, they're as important to anybody.
And Barnes said today at his press conference that those two guys could be considered captains of this team.
Exactly, and I think he also said that they work as hard as anybody outside of Admiral, which is something that's hard to do. But no, I just think, don't let the emotions get ahead of you for tomorrow night. Play your game. Mississippi State, they're just, it's, if you look at it, it's a mismatch. But at the end of the day, they have to play their game. Kyle Alexander, I think he needs to stay, I don't know if he's gotten a bad deal with a bad rep with the refs lately, but, he's just got to stay out of foul trouble. Don't know if he can. And then going to Auburn, I think, that's always a tough environment to play in, no matter if you play football, basketball, because of their rich athletic tradition. But Auburn, they just have to stay the course. They have to stay the course. They have to play inside out. They can't let their shooters, get out of rhythm. We've seen that the past few weeks. The guards haven't always had their best games, and I know that's hard to say given how well Jordan Bone played on Saturday, but they just can't get out of their zone. They have to stay in their element. They have to, play their game, be calm, collected. That's what's helped them so far this season. That's what's helped them get to. They were number 1 for 4 weeks in a row. A lot of people forget that. I don't think any teams had that for as long as consistently as long as Tennessee has. So if they play their game, they go in there with the right mindset. I think they'll be able to run the table and finish out the season with just 3 losses on their record.
I think the emotional thing's actually maybe a bigger factor than people want to talk about, because Admiral Schofield, he's known for being emotional.
Yep.
You add on the senior day aspect. I'll be interested to see how he handles the first few minutes of the game on Tuesday, and we'll see how that plays a factor. Also, if you look at Tennessee's losses this season, it's in the games they've struggled in. Outside of the Rupp Arena game, it's been a lot due to three-point shooting from the other team. And the 2 teams Tennessee plays this week, very three-point heavy with Mississippi State and Auburn.
Mm-hmm.
Both of those teams can get hot from outside, especially Auburn at home. They can go on some crazy runs at Auburn Arena with their three-point shooting. Bryce Brown, Jared Harper, those guys can really fill it up from deep. So I'm interested to see how Tennessee handles the three-point defense, because that's been a concern a little bit this season.
And they gave up. The reason Auburn came back and beat them, I know this is a different team than last year, but the reason Auburn came back in Thompson-Bowling last year was because of their outside shooting. They got hot. They were down by nearly 15 points, I believe, and they came back and beat Tennessee on their own home court.
I'll put you guys on the spot here to finish things out. If Tennessee, the Lady Vols, if they lose to LSU in the first round of the tournament, are they making the NCAA tournament?
I think they'd probably be out at that point. They're just skirting by the skin of their teeth at this point. You mentioned they're one of the last teams in, according to Charlie Cream. After Vanderbilt, he said they were out of the tournament, and that it didn't mean that they couldn't get back in, and we saw them get back in. But if they lose in the first round to Vanderbilt, then I just think there's too much going against, or LSU, sorry. There's just too much going against them to actually put them in the tournament. I don't even think their name recognition could overcome at that point, because there's probably some smaller, maybe mid-majors, or even bigger programs that deserve the spot over Tennessee based off of their records and their wins and all that. That being said, I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if they still did make the tournament, because again, name recognition is on their side, and they've had a couple quality wins this season. You could make the argument that it's Tennessee, so they deserve a spot in the postseason, even if they've struggled for a majority of the season. They'd have 8 conference wins at that point if they beat LSU, but I definitely think they need to win.
It seems like several weeks now we've been saying, like, okay, if they lose this game, they're out. If they lose this game, they're out. They've managed to hang on somehow, and like you said, probably name recognition, probably because of the history and the tradition. I don't think they can afford this loss, and I think the Vanderbilt loss did them in. It put them in this situation. If they cannot beat LSU, I would say they're probably out.
I mean, Holly Warlick said a couple weeks ago that the team understands that each game at this point is really magnified.
Right.
We didn't necessarily see that against Vanderbilt, but we saw that urgency against Ole Miss.
Right.
I think they realized against Ole Miss, I guess, that's really the only thing I can think of is that, hey, we're really playing for the NCAA tournament at this point. That was a do-or-die situation. If they had lost against Ole Miss, then I would say there's really no way they're making the tournament unless they make a deep run in the SEC tournament. And that's not likely since they've got Mississippi State if they beat LSU. So definitely need to beat LSU. We'll see if they come out with the same sense of urgency. I'd imagine they should, because not only is it they're playing for the NCAA tournament, but it's the SEC tournament. They want to get up and play for that, I'd imagine.
Yeah, after the Vanderbilt game, she, in her press conference, showed a lot more emotion than we've seen this year. And she talked about things like heart and playing for pride. So if that's what they played with yesterday, then that could be a winning formula going forward, because they're going to have to play for that against LSU. It's going to have to come down to, do you want to be this team that makes the wrong kind of history? I mean, they've done that all year. We've seen the worst, or close to the worst losing streak, the first losing record in SEC play. So, I mean, there's absolutely no reason to not be motivated against LSU.
The bubble is not a fun place to be at this time of the year. That's where the Lady Vols are.
No, whatsoever.
And it's interesting to me to think about, they've kind of folded in big moments a lot of times this season. So now they've got the biggest moment. They can't afford to lose. How do you see them responding?
I mean, yeah, as Noah said, there's really no reason they shouldn't be motivated, but they have had moments this year where they really should be motivated, and they just weren't. Against South Carolina at home, you had a chance to pick up a huge win, and if they had gotten that win, honestly, they probably would have secured a spot in the tournament because they had beaten Missouri on the road. I think that was a game where they showed urgency. And they come back home and get blown out they get blown out on the road against Texas A&M, but then they come back home and they have South Carolina. And on paper, that looks like a game, they should come out hot. They should be motivated. They should be angry because they got blown out by Texas A&M. They've still got a lot to prove with the season winding down and the NCAA tournament still nearby, and then they get blown out by South Carolina. And then you follow that up with a loss to Vanderbilt, even though, again, you could have argued they need that urgency. They need to realize that this is a win they need. Then they lose to Vanderbilt. But for some inexplicable reason, they come out against Ole Miss and come out firing, and I would like to say they'll have the urgency against LSU, but we've seen that pattern this year where we think they're starting to get better again. They went on that 3-win streak earlier where they beat LSU, then Vanderbilt, then Florida. So we thought maybe it was getting better then, and then they went on that slide where they lost, 3 in a row. So it's really hard to say whether they will or not. I'm going to say they probably will, just because I think that sense of urgency has finally set in based on what we saw against Ole Miss and then what they said after the game, and even what Holly Warlick said after the Vanderbilt loss. You mentioned how emotional she was. She was incredibly emotional, and so were the players. So I think maybe they finally realized that they can't afford to come out flat and come out uninspired.
Yeah, it feels weird to say that this would be the game that would get them motivated because, like you said, they've had opportunity after opportunity this year. With that schedule, there's been plenty of games to be motivated for and to just get that pride back. it is kind of hard to say. I don't know which team will show up, but if that Ole Miss or that Vanderbilt loss served as a springboard for that, and what we saw against Ole Miss was them actually being motivated enough to make a run here, then I mean that's a good sign. But I really don't know at this point.
Well, you guys will know in a few days. You guys will be at the game. We'll have coverage of the game on Tuesday, and then we'll be at Auburn on Saturday. So we'll have coverage for all those games this week. We'll know next week when we're back whether the Lady Vols are in the tournament, out of the tournament, what that situation looks like. Tennessee's hopes at a number 1 seed, we'll probably have a better idea of that. We'll know if they repeat as co-SEC champions, maybe took the outright. We'll have all of that coming up this week, so make sure you stay tuned for coverage of all that. We'll be back next week with another episode of Checkerboard Chat. Thanks for watching.